Less than a minute before the meeting began, Mark Reynolds entered the room. He calmly sat down against the back wall and turned his gaze to the beautiful woman in front of him. He couldn't help but notice her disdain as she looked at him and then at her watch and declared the meeting open. She was a tall woman with a rather prominent nose that stood out on her face. He had, as his grandmother said, a large figure. She wasn't overweight, but she had the curves that Mark thought a woman should have. Mark studied the woman as she turned and displayed images on the large screen. He estimated that he was about 20 years old. Her black hair was neatly pulled back into a bun. Mark thinks it should sound serious and business-oriented. Sandra Phillips quickly realized that the last man to enter the conference room was, in her opinion, a prostitute. He was about 6 feet tall, had a strong jaw and dark blue eyes. He was dressed in casual clothes that showed off his strong figure. Sandra quickly started the meeting at 9 o'clock. I am currently the marketing director and sales director at Smith & Haynes. My name is Sandra Phillips. I have a degree in marketing and business administration. I hope we can also work together to increase sales and improve customer satisfaction. As everyone knows, deep understanding leads to success in the marketplace with quality products sold at competitive prices. To this end, all members of our sales team are now required to wear professional attire. I think most of you are already aware of this fact. Mark couldn't help but notice that his new boss was looking right at him. Apparently, he didn't like khaki pants or a polo shirt. Gentlemen, you must wear a jacket and tie when representing our company. Otherwise, they won't fit Smith & Haynes. Ladies will also be dressed in appropriate business attire. There will be no exceptions. I'm not going to talk about this today because it's obviously a new concept to some, but from now on, no one will be able to attend our weekly sales meetings in casual clothing. I say no again. No more exceptions. Are there any other questions? Mark couldn't hide his smile as the woman looked at him with obvious annoyance. Please tell me your name so I can make some notes on your file, he insisted, and Mark's words were clearly an attempt to intimidate him. I don't think that's necessary, Mark replied, his smile widening. Let's end this meeting so we can get to work. Everyone in the room was silent. Mark never takes things too seriously, but he has high hopes for his new boss. Don't you think this is necessary? The woman repeated. You know what? I don't think you need to be here. I have read the company rules. I have the right to give you a week's unpaid leave, and that's exactly what I'm doing. You are not allowed. I will be visiting this building until our meeting next Monday. Next, I want you to put on a jacket and tie. Be prepared to apologize. Thank you, Mrs. Phillips, Mark said politely and left the room. A week later, Mark walked into the conference room wearing shorts and an Eagles t-shirt. You know, I won't let you come to our meetings looking like this, Sandra Phillips explained. You're acting like a guy who's about to get fired. I saved you the trouble, Mark replied, handing her a sealed envelope. Here is my resignation letter. I went to the HR department to fill out the paperwork. I wish the company all the best. The shocked woman tried to come to her senses. Since their first interaction, he had been studying Mark Reynolds. He is by far the best salesman in the company. The sales figures are impressive. She thought he would be better off if he were properly dressed and under her guidance. Now this is gone. 2 weeks later, Mark was in the vineyards driving an 80-year-old Alfa Romeo. As he tried to increase the gear, he heard the woman clear her throat to get his attention. Using his feet, he carefully pulled the vine out from under the pot and carried it out into the open. He was surprised to see Mrs. Edna Haynes, the owner of the business he had recently left. She was always fair to him, and he was also kind. Finding her in my store was completely unexpected. Mrs. Haynes, it's nice to see you again. Do you have any questions? I don't think I've seen you here before. I had no reason to come here before, Mark. I know you're busy, so I'll get straight to the point. They spoke to my new marketing manager twice within a week. Mark noticed that when he used the term CMO, he used his fingers to make a slight reference. During the first meeting, she asked him to take a week's unpaid leave. At the second meeting, a week later, he submitted his resignation. I noticed that you two don't get along very well. Miss Haynes, when I started working for you many years ago, I told you that I would not treat your business as my career. This young woman came out of nowhere and said my choice of clothing was inappropriate and resigned. My contract. You guys have it easier than us, Haynes said. We already have problems convincing buyers. Many of them tell me they can get the same product for less elsewhere. It is this commitment to our contract that keeps many of our clients with us. 2 days ago, I heard a story about how you got a call when one of your customers called you in a panic with a box of special screws. Travel 250 miles. They made me forget to order them with the other products we sell. They do everything they can to satisfy their customers. I guess it's part of the job, Mark replied. I'm glad my actions were appreciated, but that doesn't explain why you're here today. I don't work for you anymore. That's what I'm trying to answer here. If you want to work at Haynes & Smith again, I would like to increase your commission and base salary, the older woman said. Ma'am, I'm leaving your company for two different but very compelling reasons, Mark explained. The first reason is that my business is booming. This is my future, and I am working hard to succeed. The second and most obvious reason is that your new marketing manager is laughing at me. I just don't want to waste my time listening to your nonsense about how to become a better salesperson. He has 2 degrees and no real experience. Honestly, I don't know how he got this job. Mark heard a sigh from behind the door. When he turned around, he saw Sandra Phillips standing next to him. To his greatest shame, he listened to her every word. He hastened to try to soften the harshness of the criticism. I think Miss Phillips is very qualified and will do an excellent job for you. I'm too stubborn and inflexible to learn new techniques. She deserves better people around her, people willing to follow her advice, follow his instructions and efforts, business development. You showed why you're so good at sales, Mark. That was a big step forward, Haynes confirmed with a smile. I thought you would reject my offer, so I have a replacement. If you agree to work with Sandy and look after her for a month, I am willing to reward you much more than you earn at work. This is a decent amount. Plot. You know, Sandy is my granddaughter and the future of the company. She was a little overzealous in asserting herself, but now she has a clearer understanding of our mission. I'm sure she'll do a good job, but I don't think she'll be very receptive to my advice and business practices. She has 2 degrees and I was lucky enough to graduate from high school. Mark, don't try to insult me. I hired you. I remember you were 5th in your class and very popular. I was student body president your senior year, Haynes said. You told me that you have a 7-year plan to grow your automobile business, and that you will probably leave Smith & Haynes then. You had 3 months until you were 7 years old. I'm only asking for one of these months. I believe the hands-on experience will greatly enhance Sandy's understanding of the position and what is expected of a salesperson. After Haynes finished speaking, Mark saw her look at her grandson and nodded slightly. Mr. Reynolds, I'm not proud of my behavior during our first conversation, Sandy admitted. My grandmother clearly explained to me how stupid I was and that this should not happen again. If you accept my grandmother's offer, I assure you that I will fully cooperate and adopt your sales style as much as possible. Mark knew how hard it must have been for her to apologize. He even admired her. She is ready to take on the pressure to improve her relationship with her grandmother and hopefully expand her knowledge of how Smith & Haynes ran a successful business for over 50 years. Mrs. Haynes, Miss Phillips, I need to finish working on this car. This should be done tomorrow afternoon. The day after tomorrow is the first day of the month. I'll be in the office ready to work. I will give you whatever you want for the month you want. Mark saw Mrs. Haynes nod again at her niece, and then the young woman gave him a very friendly smile. Reynolds, my grandmother and I are so grateful for your generosity. I promise that I will be ready to start here as soon as possible. I hope to learn everything I can from you. Mark looked at Sandy Phillips for a moment, then turned his attention to his grandmother. He had several questions on the tip of his tongue, but decided not to ask them. She knew that Mrs. Haynes must have beaten her grandson severely. Sandy turned 180 degrees from her original position. Mark didn't claim to be an expert on women, but he knew Sandra must be suffering from a sense of failure on his part. The scope of cooperation has not yet been determined. 2 days later, Mark returned to work a few minutes early. His former comrades received him warmly and with good-natured jokes. Mark, I don't think I've ever seen you in a suit. Are you here to improve on your old job? Asked Amanda Burns. Something like that, Mark replied. I was in a bit of a hurry. When I came here, I promised Mrs. Haynes that I would work for 7 years. I still had a few months left. We agreed that if I gave them another month, I could leave with their blessing. That's why you're so good at selling, Amanda explained. You always keep your promises and are an excellent negotiator. Clients know you can be trusted. Sandra Phillips was just outside the room, listening to Amanda's assessment of Mark's qualities and her reaction. Mr. Reynolds, thank you for ignoring my feelings, Sandra said with a smile. Amanda, the truth is that Mrs. Haynes is unhappy with my behavior in the face of Mr. Reynolds' sudden departure. He will be training me for the next month in hopes that I can better understand the company's products and customers. To do this, I plan to introduce them to the clients I work with and make a positive impression on them, says Mark. With your training and fitness, it shouldn't be difficult. After Amanda leaves the room, Sandy decides to make sure Mark understands her point of view. You just mentioned my physical presence. You must understand that I will not sacrifice my values for a deal, no matter how important it is. That's a good point, Mark agreed. I strongly recommend that you never date, engage in inappropriate relationships, or behave inappropriately. This will end badly for you and the company. I'm glad you think so. I'm afraid you're asking me to use those physical attributes you call to make a sale, Sandy admitted. I'm afraid I didn't make myself entirely clear. There's nothing wrong with putting on your best smile and showing off your calves and cleavage, all of which should be done professionally, of course. You'll have to deal with... Are you suggesting that I use sex to sell something? Sandy asked in surprise. No, I advise you not to use sex for commercial purposes under any circumstances, Mark insisted. Sexuality is good, but sex in all its forms is not. You are a beautiful woman with an enviable figure. There is nothing wrong with using it. In your interests. Sandy looked at Mark for a few seconds before answering. If it's a compliment, then you're missing the point. I want to learn and use your selling techniques, which I find useful, but I will not show my legs or chest to sell. As a man, you obviously don't do that. You don't have the legs or cleavage to seduce other men. How can you sell that? When dealing with men, I use my product knowledge and ability to earn their respect and often their friendship. When I sell to women, I do the same thing and try to do the best I can. I smile and try to answer subtly to your fantasies. And that's why you like wearing polo shirts? Do you want your appearance and body type to influence the direction of your sales? Asked Sandy. I've certainly never met anyone associated with any of the companies we do business with. Several women smiled at me as I walked through the door. It's not unethical, Mark responded. I think it could help sales, but product and price have to be the deciding factors, Sandy concluded. So next month, we will visit customers and understand the practical application. We will continue to test and optimize our sales methods, Mark promised. Now it makes sense to argue. The next month will be interesting. Sandy looks forward to visiting clients and building long-term business relationships. In his opinion, Mark was overconfident, but the information he received showed that he had reasons for this. She admitted that he was handsome and very brave. He could easily imagine women being seduced by his charm. Mark spent the rest of the day making appointments. He decided to start with easy-to-reach customers and then gradually expand to places that required overnight stays. At 6 in the morning, Sandy pulled into the company parking lot and found Mark already there. He agreed with Mark that punctuality was important. They arrived at their destination almost an hour early. There's a nice little restaurant around the corner, Mark tells Sandy. You can find out where there are good restaurants or a good coffee shop near each of your businesses. During the trip, Sandy spent a lot of time asking Mark about his working methods and what to expect during meetings with clients. Sandy, I want you to enjoy your coffee and relax. People notice when you're nervous. They think you're trying to hide something. I chose this company mainly because they are very reasonable and friendly. You understand our products and prices. Just listen to them and answer their questions and concerns as honestly as possible. Remember, we sell ourselves as much, if not more, than we sell our products. We must give our customers confidence in our honesty and integrity. If you are unsure of the answer, admit it and explain that you will find the answer. Give the correct answers and get back to them as quickly as possible. Never lie or exaggerate, and everything will be fine. I completely understand and agree, Sandy responded. I noticed you didn't say anything about showing skin or flirting with clients. You obviously don't want to use this technique today, Mark replied. I see your hands and your face. Everything else is covered for you. Let's see how this works for you today. All I ask is that you dress a little more casually for at least one day next week. You have a very good number, and you can get a lot of benefit by reporting it. You seem to trust my figure. How do I know what kind of figure I have? Are you saying that my clothing choices don't allow men to define my body? Sand asked. You can't have the best of both worlds. Few men pay as much attention to the female form as I do, Mark replied with a smile. One of the reasons I am so successful in sales is that I can see beyond the obvious. I can often notice insecurities and character flaws within minutes of meeting people. Understanding these things can make a big difference in sales. I have to say that's nonsense, Sandy replied. You don't have the mystical ability to know my bra size and inseam. When you tell me how good my figure is, you are using your sales skills against me. You think that flattery will soften or even change my choice of clothing, but I see your feeble attempt. It's fun, Mark admits. Be honest, but you think I'm dragging your long, thin legs. I always try to be honest, but you don't trust me. Now I have to wonder if my client sees things the same way as you. Maybe I have a particularly good bullshit meter and can detect it better than anyone else. Your success in business shows that your skills work for you most of the time, suggests Sandy. Sandy gives in to Grandma's demands and takes Mark back to work because she has no other choice. Grandmother was adamant about this. In reality, Sandy wanted Mark to try to use his good looks and natural charm to increase sales. She didn't know that he knew so much about his product, about contracts, percentages, and profit margins. He doesn't hesitate to use his charm but remains professional when dealing with clients. Sandy appreciated her grandmother's wise decision to allow her to travel with Mark and experience the world of sales with a master of his trade. Sandy discovered that she enjoyed meeting with clients and listening to their needs and concerns. He understood why Mark was so good at what he did. He's always polite and professional. He remained calm, even when some customers got angry, which was rare. Another thing that surprised Sandy was the obvious interest many employees showed in Mark. They will surely respond to his charming smile and easy charm. Plus, most people you interact with become visibly friendly within minutes. During the second week of the program, Sandy and Mark traveled further and used hotels instead of spending a lot of time traveling to remote locations. Wednesday morning this week was a turning point for her. "Wow, you look great," Mark said with obvious admiration. "It suits you." "Thank you," Sandy replied, blushing. "I was going to take your advice about my appearance. This is an experiment. Don't think I'm going to follow your example and flirt with women of all ages like you." "Good idea," Mark agreed. "It would be better if you used your charm on the male population." Later that day, while Mark and Sandy were having dinner at a chain restaurant, Mark asked Sandy the question she had been waiting for. "Have you noticed any difference in the way people react to you today?" Marcos asked with a smile. "You will be with me. You see men looking at me and smiling like idiots. In fact, you are doing the same thing now." "I admit it," Mark replied with a smile. "Today they managed to increase my regular sales by almost 5%. Overall, this is a pretty good indicator. That's because your neckline is low and your skirt goes just above your knees. You'd think they'd never seen a woman before," Sandra explained. "It's rare to see a woman as beautiful as you," Mark replied. "Your style is absolutely correct. Everyone takes you seriously. Men smile at you all the time, but they also listen to you." "Don't you think I look stingy or dirty?" Sandy asked worriedly. "Seriously, Sandy, you are one of the most elegant women I know. You look and act like a stylish lady. You are attractive but attentive. You are becoming more and more attractive to our clients. Our products and purchasing process are getting better and better." "That's good," Sandy replied with some excitement. "I know we had a rough start, but I feel like we're doing a lot better now." "You're being honest with me, considering I dumped you in the first week. I explained my situation to you and your grandmother. I've been building a business since I graduated high school. My plan was to work at Smith & Haynes for 7 years. When you and I were together, I planned to leave. I was glad to be able to focus on the next race," says Mark. "It makes me happy, but I ended up losing my job for a month. I hope this doesn't set you back too much." "I was actually a little worried about what would happen to my regular clients after I left. Now I'm starting to understand that they will be good, maybe even better than you," Mark admitted. Sandy was looking forward to having lunch with Mark. He always told interesting stories, listened to their ideas, and expressed his opinions politely but convincingly, even if he did not agree with their opinions. For his part, Mark found that he enjoyed spending time with Sandy. He has an incredible sense of humor and is surprisingly humble. The best part was that he found her extremely attractive. "My sister goes to college in Keensburg," Sandy told Mark at the start of her last week of teaching. "She's coming with me on Friday, the last day of our world tour. Our last night we will stay at a hotel just 10 kilometers from her apartment. I'll go home with her so we can continue. Our lives are reunited. I hope you don't mind." "I have a brother and a sister, so I completely understand," Mark responded. "Have a nice trip home." A final visit to the company is scheduled for Thursday afternoon, followed by a meeting with the owner on Friday morning to persuade him to sign the purchase agreement. Having finished work early on Friday, Mark hoped to be home by the afternoon. Mark felt that the Thursday afternoon meeting went well, except for one topic that seemed very real to him. The store owner's 30-year-old son was very pleased with Sandy. Mark admitted that the boy was handsome, but Mark's opinion was influenced by his past experiences with the man. He is aggressive and demanding. Mark was observed to repeatedly belittle employees during sales meetings. On the way back to the hotel, Sandy felt almost dizzy. He talked all the time but said very little. In the end, she failed to keep her secret. "Brett invited me to dinner tonight, so don't expect me to come. We just had dinner at the hotel restaurant before heading to the lounge. There's a small band playing tonight, so we'll probably dance." "Brett's a good guy, don't you think?" Sandy asked, although she didn't seem interested in the answer. "He's handsome and has a great wardrobe. We could even get more work from your company. But that's not why I accepted your request. Looks like a lot of fun." Mark wanted to express his concern to Sandy, but decided to remain silent. She had to work without him on Friday morning. She was in her 20s, had 2 higher educations, and was destined to become the director of a famous company. What else could he say that she shouldn't know? Mark really likes Sandy, but thinks it would be unethical to propose to her, at least until their working relationship ends. Now he wonders if he made a mistake or just dodged a bullet. If Brett was the man he was looking for, then she was not who he thought she was. Mark ordered dinner in his room while checking emails about his classic car restoration business. He is proud of the success his company has achieved. It started right after school. He now plans to devote all his time and energy to his career. His days with Smith and Haynes were finally over. Just after 11, Mark finished the evening and went to bed. He had just fallen into a deep sleep when he was awakened by a loud knock on his hotel room door. Mark got out of bed and headed towards the door, trying to clear the fog from his head. As soon as she turned the steering wheel, Sandy opened the door and walked in, dragging her suitcase behind her. She closed the door and turned to Mark with tears in her eyes. "That bastard thought I was a calm guy. After dinner and a little dancing, he insisted on showing me to my room. He took my room key to open the door and never gave it back to me. He immediately started beating me and closed the door." One of the disadvantages of wearing cleavage-revealing dresses is that it makes it easier for perverts to grab your breasts. Before we left, I asked him to get some ice for the bottle of wine he found in the minibar. Once he was out of sight and I started looking for the ice maker, I grabbed my phone and suitcase and ran down the hallway. "Key, so I'll stay with you tonight if I can." Sandy seemed to finally realize that Mark was standing in front of her in his boxers. The corners of his mouth drooped, his eyes slowly moved to his chest, and then looked south. "I think you slept in your underwear. I guess I should be grateful that you brought so many things with you. I know you're a healthy guy, but you're in better shape than I thought. I have a message I want to send to my sister tomorrow, so don't listen to me. Go back to bed, or do whatever you want when I knock on your door." Mark had already woken up, but looked at the clock next to his bed and saw that it was already past midnight. He made a long drive the next day and saw no benefit in standing up to Brett. He was probably out of breath and a little upset that he couldn't go to bed. "You can stay here, but I won't give up the bed," Mark replied. "I told you about going on a date with one of our clients and how it was a terrible idea. Brett is a complete idiot. You should have seen this before I bought your big puppy. I go back to bed. And what? This? What's happening? If this happens, don't hesitate." Mark is still mad at Sandy for dating an idiot like Brett. He's glad she's leaving him, but he's not happy with her decision to date him at all. Mark realized that before he said too much to Sandy, he needed to take a step back and honestly evaluate his feelings. Unexpectedly, he quickly fell asleep again. He woke up in the middle of the night with Sandy sleeping next to him. Her head rested on his arm and her left leg rested on his. She was wearing one of his t-shirts, which she had apparently taken from her suitcase. Looking at her, Mark realized that she could still wear any shirt he had. After some time, Mark woke up from another knock on the door. He swore under his breath that if it had been Brett, that bastard, he would have kicked his own ass. When he turned the knob, the door opened again. Much to his surprise, a beautiful young woman entered his room. She quickly looked him up and down, thought to herself, and then began to look around the room. At that moment, Sandy turned and opened her eyes. "Sarah, why are you here in the middle of the night? Is there something wrong?" My sister, did you sleep with this man? Did he beat you up? Should I call the police? Asked the young woman who Mark now knew was Sandy's sister. Mark? He would never hurt me, he's one of the good ones, Sandy replied. Why are you here at this hour? Sandy, it's almost 8 in the morning. You texted me and said we needed to have breakfast before our meeting today. You didn't mention that you were going to sleep with this handsome boy. Are you working on this? Romance in the workplace. Is this a good idea? Asked Sarah. I'm not sleeping with Mark, Sandy insisted. Well, I probably slept with him, but that's exactly what we did. We sleep together, that's all. When you say that, it's great because this guy looks so good, Sarah replied. What happened to that bastard who hit you last night? Then Mark woke up again. The two sisters continued talking in their room. He closed the bathroom door and began to shower. Sandy, why would you date a gangster when you have a big guy like Mark? Sarah asked when they were alone. Sometimes I don't know what you're thinking. Honestly, I don't know, Sandy replied. I wish Mark would tell me to forget Brett and ask me out. You're right, he's handsome, but I can't make him see me as a desirable woman. I hate my big nose. Maybe I need to fix them. You always said that you were proud of your appearance, and that any man who was interested in you would love you for who you are. Did he ever mention anything about your nose or appearance? In fact, he always told me I was attractive. He just didn't act like he believed it. He did a good job professionally, but personally I didn't seem to care much about him, Sandy complained. Sister, when you opened the door, a real dawn dawned on you. I can't say if this was helpful to you, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was. Maybe he was shy, maybe he didn't want to. Be at work when meeting women. Is that a bruise? Sarah suddenly asked, looking at her sister's neckline. Where? Damn, Sandy said, looking at the shirt he was wearing. I said that bastard treated me badly, but I didn't tell you how much he hurt me. I don't want you to worry. Last night, when he came into my room uninvited, he simply put his hands on my waist, grabbed my breasts and squeezed tightly. He was drunk and said stupid things about how much he loved him and how much I love him. I will learn to love him too. I had to use all my sales skills to convince him to go buy ice cream. As I said in the text, I still had the room key, so I grabbed my suitcase and phone and ran to Mark's room. This guy hurt me, and I'm afraid he won't take no for an answer. Brett squeezed your breast so hard it hurt, Marcos asked. Sarah and Sandy were surprised to see Mark standing behind them with only a towel wrapped around his stomach. There was an expression on his face that Sandy had never seen on him before. He was angry. Seeing that he was not satisfied, Sandy immediately agreed to his request. Yes, it left marks on my left breast. I didn't encourage him or let him touch me, Mark. He just put his hand on my head and squeezed hard. Mark seemed to consider her words before making his request. I don't want to embarrass you, Sandy, but can I see these bruises? Although her sister was surprised by the request, she was surprised when Sandy nodded and pulled the top of her shirt down enough to expose her left breast. It would never have occurred to Sandy to reject Mark. She saw the strength of emotion on his face. It was obvious that he was very unhappy. She couldn't help but feel nervous and uncomfortable as he stared at her breasts so intently. She wondered if he would actually touch her if she placed her hand a few inches above the bruise and nodded, imagining Brett squeezing it. Sarah, please use Sandy's phone to take a picture of these bruises. Mark finally looked away from Sandy's chest. I don't know how it happened, but they were probably necessary. Make sure you have several clear images. It is clear that they were made by a great hand. You'll regret doing this. Tell your sister, I promise. Still upset, Mark opened his suitcase and pulled out a clean pair of boxers. He muttered something as he put down the towel and put on his boxers. Sarah's sigh brought him to his senses. I forgot where I was for a minute. Or rather, I knew where it was, but I forgot that the lady was there, Mark explained. I think about the poor guy and how the father gave the son complete freedom of action so that he could do. Looking back at some of the things I've seen and heard over the years, I now realize that I should have done something. At the very least, I should have ended our business relationship. Sandy, you're not coming back to work today. Enjoy breakfast with your sister and return home safe and comfortable. I'll take care of everything here. Relax and enjoy your time with Sarah. What are you going to do? If we're not careful, we'll lose their business completely. They buy a lot of our products, Sandy explained nervously. Sandy, you should be afraid of losing our business. Smith and Haynes shouldn't have to deal with scum like that. I will refuse you as a client. I'll call your grandmother and explain everything. I am confident that we would not do business with a company that treats people the way Brett treats you. I think you're probably right, Sandy admitted. When you see Brett, be careful what you say to him. He's a big guy, and in high school he bragged about being a tough football player. I bet, Mark replied with a wry smile. If you don't feel anything for him, I will leave new scars on his face. I'd like to see what he likes. I don't care, Mark. I just don't want you to get hurt or get in trouble because I was stupid enough to date that idiot, Sandy explained. Sarah, don't forget to take a photo of the bruise, then go have breakfast with your sister. I'll take care of everything here. This is the last day of the month that you promised my grandmother. I learned a lot traveling with you, Mark, Sandy said as she walked up to Mark and hugged him. If you ever want to come back to Smith and Haynes, there is a job for you here, I promise. Good luck in your budding career. Sister, you can wait for him to dress better before you hug him. But if you think about it, it's just a sight, Sarah said with a smile, looking at Mark's naked torso. By the middle of the next month, Sandy had established herself as a competent sales manager and was increasingly satisfied with her marketing role. She hasn't spoken to Mark since he told her to go home with Sarah. This fact disappointed Sandy. She thought they were getting along well. She even expected Mark to show romantic interest in her, especially after the story his grandmother told him the following Monday. Sandy, Mark, and I talked in detail about the month you took care of him. The first thing he mentioned was how and why he broke off our relationship with Gaston and his son. He told me about the extremely inappropriate behavior of young Gaston and his son. For Mark, this was the last straw. He told Ben Gaston in no uncertain terms that his son Brett was a worthless little bastard and that we would never deal with someone like him again. Mark told me he would do it. He feels that you understand his decision, Sandy replied. Will that be a problem now? I don't think so. The same day Mark ended their relationship, Ben Gaston called me and got angry. You mean they actually want our product? Sandy asked in surprise. Unlikely. He wanted me to fire Mark. I think Mark said some nasty things to Brett and Ben. Mark was almost to his car when Brett caught up with him in the company parking lot. Police have CCTV footage of Brett punching Mark in the face. No, I warned Mark that Brett was a big, tough guy. Is he injured? Asked Sandy. Yes, he spent the night in the hospital, but is expected to make a full recovery. After police asked a number of questions and reviewed CCTV footage, Mark was not charged. It was definitely self-defense, Grandma Sandy replied mischievously, causing Sandy to gasp in surprise. Grandma, do you mean? Mark kicked his ass, Haynes said, laughing. You made a good impression on Mark. He admitted that he wasn't disappointed when Brett attacked him. I was angry that this idiot did this to you. Is there something wrong between you and Mark? I haven't talked to him since Friday, but honestly, I wouldn't mind getting to know him better, Sandy told her grandmother. He doesn't work for us anymore, so it shouldn't be a problem, right? Darling, if he's the one for you, don't worry about the little things. If things don't work out for us, then everything is fine and you're right. Honestly, I'll never refuse to communicate with a man. Opportunity. I love Mark not for how we treat each other. Sandy thought about contacting Mark but didn't find a good reason to do so. If I was interested, I would call her or go to work. 3 weeks later, Sandy and her family attended the wedding of one of her cousins. Grandma Sandy was one of 4 sisters. His 3 sisters each had several children, and now his grandchildren have grown up and have spouses. Sandy has 12 cousins, and they are all adorable. As a child, Sandy spent a lot of time with them. They get along like sisters. As the girls entered high school and college, Sandy felt excluded from their conversations, which largely revolved around boys. Sandy is considered the least attractive cousin. While others shared stories of dating and romance, Sandy didn't have much to add. His cousins noticed this. Sandy focused on her studies and did well in school, but she never had a serious romantic relationship. Sarah insisted that Sandy's lack of fans was due to her strong, unbending character. She asked Sandy to stop being so harsh and critical. Boys simply don't like girls who are bossy and aggressive. Although Sandy realizes that Sarah is right, she is unwilling to accept mediocrity in herself and others. This attitude has a lot to do with the fact that on weekends, he is usually home while his friends and cousins go out on dates. Now another cousin is married. Sandy has been to many of these types of weddings to know how it will go. First, all the girls introduce their dates. At one point, Sandy was asked if she had been with anyone, even though all of her cousins knew about her shady dating history. Sandy is the center of attention for a few awkward minutes. as the girls exchanged names of potential suitors and explained why they might be a good match for her. Over time, the conversation will move on to less painful topics. At the reception, Sandy felt déjà vu again. Her cousin Angela had just married a handsome, muscular man, and her cousins agreed that she had found the right man. "Sandy, are you here with someone important today?" Mary asked loudly, and the other women focused on her. "Well, I don't really have time to take on a new position at Smith and Haynes. Grandma wants me to learn the business well enough to succeed her. No time for dates? Have you met any interesting men since Brianna got married last spring?" Maria insisted. "Not really," Sandy began before Sarah interrupted her. "I would say Mark is a very interesting guy. My sister doesn't talk much, but she spent a month learning the business from a very handsome boy." Sandy loves her sister, who works hard to improve her social status, but worries about the questions she will inevitably face. "Yeah," said Cousin Charity. "Work romance? Does this always work? How is this boy?" "Well, Sandy said before Sarah revealed some shocking information. "I just walked in," Sarah snapped and looked towards the entrance. Mark smiled and shook hands with the groom, who was standing at the entrance greeting the guests. Judging by their backs slapping and laughing, it's clear that these two are good friends. "Wow," Maria exhaled. "Looking good, Sandy. You're going to introduce us to your boyfriend, aren't you?" Sandy looked at Sarah, trying to find a reasonable answer to Mary's question. Why does it seem like Sarah is in a relationship with Mark? Now he was faced with the most uncomfortable situation he had ever encountered. Sarah saw Sandy's grimace and decided to make the best of the situation. "I don't think Mark has met Sandy yet. I will find him and take him with me so everyone can meet each other. He's a great guy." Sarah saw Sandy's face turn red at her words. Sarah had only met Mark once, but she was confident that he would be a gentleman and help Sandy get out of the mess Sarah had made. Mark was talking to his friend Lance when he recognized Sarah walking toward him. His smile widened as he hugged her. "Sarah, I didn't know you'd be here today. Are you and Angela friends? Is Sandy here too?" "Yes, Sandy is here and she needs your help. I practically told all of our cousins that she was dating a very attractive guy when they asked her if she was dating. I got the impression that they liked each other and that they liked all the girls. I want to meet them." Sandy was very afraid that she would be exposed as a desperate woman, and it was my fault, Sarah said when she brought Mark to tell her about her brother's meeting. He quickly explained to her, "Can you be really nice to her? It will be very important for Sandy to keep me away from her kennel." As Mark walked around the room with Sarah, he absorbed everything she told him. "This is what they asked me to do. Don't worry, I got it." Sandy froze as Sarah and Mark approached her. "I didn't know what to say, what to do, and how to get out of this situation." Mark stood in front of Sandy with a smile, hugged her, pulled her towards him, and spoke loudly. "Nice to see you again, Sandy." He took her in his arms and whispered something in her ear. "Can I kiss you? Are you all right?" Sandy looked into his eyes questioningly as he released her from his arms. He saw what he was looking for and pressed his lips to Mark's. He needed no further support and pulled Sandy to his chest. Sandy lost track of time as her emotions completely took over. Mark asked to kiss her and she felt relieved that he was in her arms and she didn't care who saw her. She didn't want this moment to end. "Sister, you're making a little noise here," Sarah said quietly to her sister, but loud enough for the others to hear. "These bitches will wet their panties just looking at you." "Oh, Grandma is here. You should let this guy go and see what he wants." Sandy's face was bright red as she left Mark to meet his grandmother. As he regained control of his emotions, he began to wonder if something was wrong. To his surprise, Grandma Haynes walked up to Mark and kissed him on the cheek. She took his hand and turned to Sandy with a bright smile. "Your parents want to know who the young man was who hugged you and greeted you so warmly," Mrs. Haynes said. "I assured them he was a wonderful person and offered to introduce him to him. Your mom is very curious. Let's find out." Sandy was in Mark's arms, not even suspecting that her parents and grandmother were present at the reception. She had never done anything, not even kissed a man passionately in front of them. God, a warm handshake with a man would drive him crazy. "Grandma, let me introduce you," Sandy insisted as she took Mark to meet his parents. "Mother, Dad, this is Mark Reynolds. This is the guy I told you about when I worked for Smith and Haynes," Sandy said. "Mark, these are my parents, William Phillips and Janet Phillips." Mark smiled and contacted Sandy's mother, but she didn't do it. She crossed her arms and hugged him warmly. "If Sandy can kiss you like that, her mother can hug you," Janet said. "Jesus, aren't you the strongest? Did I already mention that I'm glad to see you?" Sandy was a little embarrassed by her mother's warm welcome. When she realizes that Mark was the first man her parents met, she tries to remember how excited her mother was about the boy Sandy introduced her to. William Phillips was not very impressed. He took Mark's hand but felt the need to scold him. "I'm not a big fan of public displays of affection, Mr. Reynolds. I hope they respect my daughter." Mark immediately recognized William as a beautiful stuffed toy. "Phillips, you have every right to your opinion. I accept this. It doesn't change the fact that every time your beautiful daughter receives a hug or a kiss from me, she gets the same too." William Phillips turned red and began to swell. Sarah saw this and quickly tried to lighten the mood. "I think you're talking about me, Mark." "I'm ready for all your hugs and kisses," Sarah joked as she hugged Mark. "I'm actually talking about Philip's other beautiful daughter, Sarah," Mark replied with a smile. "But if Sandy agrees, I'll be glad." "Don't even think about it, Buster," Sandy interrupted, but with a big smile on her face. "Mark, can you come with me and meet the rest of my family, especially with the coven members standing at the bar looking at us?" After leaving her parents, Sandy stopped and turned to Mark. "What just happened? Sarah asked you to save me from an unpleasant situation? Are you just a gentleman? Why did you kiss me like that?" "Sarah told me she got you into trouble and asked me for help," Mark admitted. As the smile faded from Sandy's face, he gently placed his hands on her shoulders and pulled her closer. He raised his face to her. "Sandy, this is like a dream come true for me. Sarah doesn't need to twist my arm. You are a beautiful woman, and I really enjoy being with you. I'm not pretending here. I want to be you." Sandy smiled and kissed him tenderly on the lips. "That's what I want to hear. I'm not trying to be polite, sorry for my French. I like being with you, but only if you want the same. I want to get to know you better with your boyfriend. Didn't expect you to come today." "I played baseball with Lance in high school. One summer we lived together in a tour group. He and I became good friends. A few minutes ago I found out that Angela is your cousin." Sandy smiled as she introduced Mark to her many cousins and relatives. It was clear that they were impressed by his appearance and behavior. Mark often told him that a good salesman should only sell one thing. It's a problem in itself, and if you can fix that, everything else will fall into place. Mark was charming, funny, and caring about the whole family. There was clear approval in his response. According to family tradition, the tables were set and the cousins sat at separate tables. Ever since she came of age, they had done more than just drink and tell stories. This is usually one of those moments where Sandy listens but doesn't interfere. He never felt like he had anything interesting to offer. Mark was asked how he met Sandy. He overlooked the fact that Sandy sent him home after he left work without pay minutes after they met. She fired him at the second meeting. Sandy laughed along with everyone else, realizing that this was actually a very funny story. "Sister, tell everyone how you slept with Mark," Sarah said, a little drunk. "It's a beautiful story." Everyone's attention immediately turned to the blushing Sandy. "Thank you very much, Sarah. You just gave everyone here the impression that Mark and I are lovers." "This is so scary," Marcy joked. "From my point of view, I don't see anything wrong with it. I have to say this now. Your imagination will be much worse than what actually happened," Sandy said. "That was the end of my time with Mark as a mentor. I told her how my grandmother insisted that I learn sales from specialists. As always, she was right. I learned a lot. The son of the owner of one of our most important clients flirted with me. Honestly, I was hoping to make Mark a little jealous. I agreed to have dinner with a guy from our hotel and then go dance at a club, later. I foolishly thought that Mark would speak his mind and stop me. He notes that you can flirt a little with clients to get sales, but never meet them, date them, or build relationships outside of business. Mark didn't protest at all. I think he went to his room before me, and this guy even had dinner. We drank too much at dinner. Then we went into the living room to dance. We also drank a little. She was worried about how much I had eaten and told her I was done for the night and ready to go back to my room. So how did you manage to have fun with another man and sleep with Mark at the same time? Mary thought. That idiot insisted on taking me to my room. When I pulled out the key card to get in, he snatched it from my hand, opened the door and followed me into the room, Sandy said. I was wearing a dress that showed my cleavage. This idiot closed the door. Then he turned around, put his hand on my blouse and squeezed the tears out of my left breast. I held back my tears and told him that we were going to have ice cream with alcohol in the minibar. He complained for a while but went to get some ice cream. He took the key to my room. I took the sheets, took the phone, went into the hallway and knocked on Mark's door. It was about midnight. Mark added, I was fast asleep, so it took me a few seconds to wake up. I walked to the door and opened it to see who would be knocking on my door in the middle of the night. Sandy walked past me and locked the door. I told her that Brett, my boyfriend's name, had treated me badly, and after I texted Sarah asking to meet the next morning in Mark's room instead of mine, I was going to spend the night in her room. I thought Sandy would complain because the guy had a little hard hands. I can understand why this guy tried to do this. As you can see, Sandy looked good, Mark said. Mark went to bed in his underwear. By the time I texted Sarah, he had already fallen back to sleep. I found one of his t-shirts, put it on, and went to bed. He was wearing boxers, so I guess no, he didn't plan anything. The next morning, Sarah came into the room and noticed a bruise on the collar of Mark's shirt that I was wearing. Save it, Sarah insisted. When I knocked on the door the next morning, Mark answered the door. He was wearing boxers and his muscles were clearly visible. When I finally looked back, I saw Sandy lying on the bed. You can imagine what I was thinking. Sandy assured me that what I thought would never happen. This made me question my sister's sanity. While we were talking, Mark went to the bathroom to take a shower. I noticed a bruise on Sandy's body and asked her about it, down, and was surprised to see how alive he was. Sandy told me how the boy grabbed her breast and squeezed it so hard it hurt. We never heard Mark enter the room again until he suddenly appeared there, wrapped in a towel, furious. It was a little scary. He asked Sandy if she wanted to show him the bruises. I couldn't believe it when she reached over and took his shirt off, revealing his big puppy. Wait, Sandy only showed him her breasts because he asked her to? Asked Maria. Sandy, why do you show him your breasts when you're not together? I asked myself the same question, Sandy admitted. I was very nervous and anxious, and it never occurred to me to say no. He was in a position where he felt good. Wow, that's a great story, Marcy said, looking at Mark to see his reaction. I owe Sandy an apology for my inappropriate behavior. When I heard how much that bastard hurt her, I didn't think twice, Mark admitted. Yes, he got very angry and threw the towel in front of my sister, and I thought we weren't there at all. Pulling out a pair of clean boxers, he muttered obscenities, Sarah added. It gets better and better, says Mary. Have two sisters seen this guy naked? He was too crazy to care about scarring you for life. It's a wonderful story. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about how Mark beat up a guy and sent him to the hospital after he told his dad that Smith and Haynes didn't want his stuff, Sandy added dryly. Nothing? Maria snapped. I think it's amazing when a man protects his wife. The boy took it and Mark gave it to him. Good job, Marcos. Sandy listened as the others began to share their experiences. He was surprised that he didn't feel ashamed or embarrassed about his actions. No one seemed offended that he showed Mark the bruises on his chest. He was not accused of sleeping in his own bed. Everyone acted like it was completely natural, but Sandy felt like she and Mark had something special. It was completely inappropriate, but somehow it felt right. The reception ended and everyone started saying goodbye and talking about how much fun they had. Almost everyone close to Sandy told Sandy how wonderful she was. It made her happy, but it also made her wonder if she really had this man. Mom and Dad are ready to go. Sarah and I went with them, so we had to go too, Sandy told Mark. Dad always sulks about his lack of remorse when he complains about us kissing in public. Mom and Grandma think you're the cat's pajamas, and you are. For some reason, you were so kind to me today. I appreciate it. I had a good time. Can I take you home? Marcos asked. Tell your dad we're kissing in private so he doesn't have to worry. This is good. I told them not to take me. You take me home. Mark watched as Sandy talked to her family. His mother and Mrs. Haynes looked at him and smiled. Sarah waved at him, and William Phillips frowned and walked out. Everyone thought it was a good idea to take you along except my dad, Sandy told Mark when he returned. Yeah, it looks like a cat that just pooped in the oatmeal, Mark replied, laughing. Mark told Sandy stories about his youth and family. During their collaboration, he never revealed any personal information to her. When they got to Sandy's house, she turned to him and kissed him on the cheek. Tomorrow I'm going to Hawaii for business and pleasure. I'm going to meet people who are interested in restoring cars. Fun is hanging out with my brother Jeff. He's a Marine, and he has some free time. He arrived by plane from Okinawa. Can I call, text, or email you? Mark asked Sandy. Now I'm upset about the trip because I know you're not mad at me. I haven't contacted you since we started working together because I realized how bad it was that morning in the hotel room. Proud of it. Mark, I feel closer to you now because I know more about your life before we met. Your family seems wonderful. I'm sorry that my father was so cruel to you, but I'm sorry that your mother and grandmother like you. Sarah thinks you're hot, but she's seen you naked, so that's understandable. It wasn't my best moment, Sandy. I have a bad habit of ignoring everything around me when I'm angry or stressed. I only think about the problem I'm facing. This is completely inappropriate. Yes, I needed to check. Like a complete idiot, I want to apologize to you again. Sarah was very impressed. To be honest, me too. It was completely inappropriate, but showing you my breasts is not exactly the height of good manners. Maybe we're secret exhibitionists, Sandy suggested. As beautiful as you are, I understand why you would be proud to be seen, Mark explained. I stopped, gasping. Now you're going to pack it really tight, Sandy replied. I know what I look like. I will never look like a model. My butt is too big and my nose looks like a potato, Mark laughed at this comment. Dad, you have a strong nose that gives you character. The condition of your ass is not even in doubt. You look like a real woman, not an anorexic blonde. Mark walked Sandy to her door. She stopped and looked at him with a sparkle in her eyes. When he picked her up and kissed her passionately, it was the invitation she needed. I'll drive you crazy with texts and emails, Mark promised. Given our commitments and the time difference, I will call you when we can spend time together. I'm taking my time, Sandy promised. We are waiting for your response. Sandy eagerly awaited the messages and photos Mark sent to her phone. It's no surprise that Hawaii is a beautiful place. Sandy especially loved the view from Mark's hotel balcony. There were pictures of the beach and ocean outside. Sandy has decided to visit the Hawaiian Islands in the near future. Of course, on the day Mark was supposed to return home, Sandy had to stay overnight to visit one of her company's biggest clients. I had hoped to meet him earlier, but it was impossible. The good news is that you understand what your job is. Mark told Sandy he needed to meet clients the next evening, so she went to a local steakhouse for happy hour and a blackfish sandwich. Shortly after Sandy sat down, an extremely attractive blonde about her age sat down at the table next to her. Soon, the blonde was joined by several other young women. Sandy tried not to listen, but a group of women at the next table did not stop her. How were Hawaii and Brittany? Did you have fun? Your tan looks amazing, the redhead asked the stunning blonde. I didn't see as much as you think, replied the woman, who Sandy now knew was Brittany. For some reason, I spend a lot of time in bed. Could it be because of the tall, dark, and handsome man? Asked a brunette with ash-brown hair. It might have something to do with it, Brittany replied with a bright smile. This man is a sex machine. I could see the boats in the sea from my bed, so I guess I did a little sightseeing. You really had a crush on that guy, didn't you? You thought I was an idiot at school, the redhead said. What changed your opinion about him? I was a skinny kid who always talked about cars. It was boring. Physically, he made no impression. I met him at the mall last Christmas and he remembered me. I think it's the same guy. Positions and a very talkative guy. I think those 10 days in Hawaii probably convinced him that I was the girl of his dreams. Do you think you can marry him? Both women asked at the same time. I'm just saying that there's a good chance you'll ask me an important question soon. And if you do, my answer is yes. Brittany Reynolds has a beautiful voice, doesn't she? Is that what she thinks? Sandy was so upset that she had to leave before anyone saw her tears. He threw $50 on the table and ran out of the restaurant. Mark called her later that evening, but she let the call go to voicemail. After thinking a little, he decided to block her number. Any sane person would have picked up on the subtle hint that she didn't want to talk to him. Sandy had no intention of becoming one of the women in Mark's stable. He flew to Hawaii with a blonde who looked like a model. He knew he could never compete with a woman like her. The lack of respect he showed was absolutely shocking. As Sandy suspected, it didn't take long for Mark to realize that Sandy wanted nothing to do with him. A week after Sandy kicked him out, Mark messaged Sarah on social media and asked if she could tell him why Sandy was stalking him. Sarah responded that evening, "Your explanation is very vague." She tells Mark that Sandy is not an idiot and that he should leave her alone. Mark tried to demand answers from Sarah, but discovered that Sarah had blocked him too. Things get even more challenging between Thanksgiving and Christmas. A major winter storm is expected to hit the Northeast, with snow amounts measured in feet rather than inches. Temperatures are expected to drop into the single digits with gusty winds. Mark monitors the weather forecast and does everything he can to prepare for possible power and communications outages. Storms can seriously damage phone lines and even cell towers. Mark's phone vibrated in his pocket. He was shocked to see Sandy's number on the caller ID. "Mark, I know I can't ask you for help, but Sarah could be in danger. He was supposed to be driving home from college before the storm hit, but it blew up between Henderson Point and Hastings Point. The tire was damaged, got a flat tire. The truck driver finally stopped to help her change the tire, but he was an hour late and it was snowing heavily. When he got back on the road, he called his mother. Even given the poor road conditions, we expected him to return within a few hours. I had an all-terrain vehicle, so I decided to accompany her along the same route she took back to her home. I only managed to do this, an entourage at a donut shop in Blairtown. My car can't drive in this kind of snow. Now I'm stuck here. Because of the weather, nothing is working. A few hours ago." "Yes, your call goes straight to voicemail." "Sandy, I'll be there in half an hour. Stay in the car, leave the engine running and the heater on," Mark agreed without asking. Sandy was immediately relieved when Mark answered her question so favorably. "I could have easily knocked him out. The emergency warning system warns about every trip." The weather was described as life-threatening, but Mark didn't ask any questions or swear. He simply explained that he had come to see her. Realizing the predicament she was in, she immediately thought of Mark. There is no other option. She knew that no matter what difficulties they faced, he would do everything he could for her and Sarah. 20 minutes later, a large van pulled into the parking lot next to him. Snow was falling from the front bumper, which Sandy said was quite high off the ground. When Sandy parked the car, Mark opened the door. "Lock him up and get in my truck," Mark insisted. "This is the strongest storm we have seen in decades. We need to find Sarah, or at least make sure she's safe. I wonder which way he goes home. I'm afraid he'll try to take a shortcut to Warren Road. This is the small path that is always the last to be cleared. The houses are located quite far from each other. There are sharp turns and no guardrails." "We always chose this route when we went to their college," Sandy said. "You could end up on the road, or worse, drive off the road and get stuck. I'm worried about her." "We won't stop searching until we're sure he's safe," Mark promised. "This truck has all kinds of equipment. We are as prepared as possible." We arrived at Warren Road half an hour later. Mark seemed to be driving slowly towards Sandy, but she assumed he knew better. The snow rolled off the hood and sides, but the truck continued to move. 10 minutes later, Mark suddenly stopped and backed away slightly. Sandy looked around. She saw only white. "What happened, Marcos? Did you see anything?" "The snow on the side of the road seems too flat compared to other places. I think something must have cleared the place long after the snow fell. Wait here while I look." When Mark pulled onto the side of the road and saw a steep hill, he found Sandy next to him. "Look, that's Sarah's car in that canyon," Sandy shouted, driving away as fast as the deep snow would allow. Somehow, Mark managed to get to the wrecked car before Sandy. Because the driver's door was stuck in the wood, it moved to the driver's side. The door does not open because the vehicle's gear is in park. He explained to Sandy that he had a tool in his truck that would allow him to break down the doors, window safely, and then quickly left. Sandy tried to look through the tinted glass but couldn't see anything clearly. What she saw greatly disturbed her. Sarah seemed to collapse onto the steering wheel. Suddenly, Mark was next to her again. He had a small tool in his hand and broke the window. Mark carefully lowered the window to the floor, next to the passenger seat. Then he entered and opened the door. Sandy opened the door when she heard the lock open. He crawled towards Sarah, who remained motionless. He spent less than a minute assessing his sister's condition. She is alive, but unconscious. He is cold and has a small bump on his head. Normally, we shouldn't transport the wounded, but if we don't keep them warm, they'll freeze to death and get more injuries to save her. Sandy explained calmly. I'll try to help you, but basically you'll have to carry her up the steep hill and into the truck. It will be a battle, but we have to keep them warm. It took a lot of effort, but 20 minutes later, Mark carefully placed Sarah in his truck with the headlights on full blast. Sandy asked him to put Sarah on his lap instead of in the back seat. I'm trying to calm her down and warm her up. How long will it take us to get to the hospital? I hate to break it to you, but I don't know if we'll ever get there. I can barely see the tracks we left half an hour ago. Mark replied, I think our best option is my apartment. Mark, what do you think is best? I trust your knowledge on this matter. Please do your best to arrive safely so we can take care of Sarah. After more than 40 agonizing minutes, Mark backed the truck into a large garage. A minute later, Sarah was already home. On the way home, Sandy contacted her mother and told her that they had found Sarah and would do everything they could to take care of her. Sandy assured her mother that Sarah would feel better soon. "Where is your bathroom?" "Do you have a bathroom?" asked Sandy. "I want to take her wet clothes off as soon as possible and let her take a warm bath. Follow me, I'll take her to my room. The master bathroom has a large spa bath. I'll start filling it with hot water while you take care of Sarah." Mark carefully laid Sarah down on her double bed and ran into the bathroom to drain the tub, while Sandy carefully began to undress Sarah. "Mark, you need to put her in the tub," Sandy ordered. "She's breathing normally, but very shallowly. Try gently lowering them into the water. I'll go with her so she doesn't drown or anything." Mark carefully lifted the beautiful naked woman from the bed and carried her to the bathroom. As he prepared to pamper Sarah, Sandy, also naked, climbed into the tub and sat with her arms raised to greet her sister. As both women took their seats, Mark began to relax. Sweat dripped from his nose. This made him realize that he was wet. He unbuttoned his heavy jacket and dropped it to the floor. He watched as they tore off several layers of clothing from him until all that was left was his boxers, clinging to him like a second skin. He grabbed a towel and went into the shower. 5 minutes later, he came out with a towel and felt much better. "Sarah, move over!" Sandy shouted from the bathtub. "Can I have some tissues and tissues? Can you lower the water temperature a little? It's getting hot here." Now that Mark felt refreshed after his bath and had time to relax, he noticed his two beautiful sisters sitting naked in the bathtub. He tried to look away and played with the water temperature scale. "For God's sake, Mark, you brought Sarah here naked and then gave her to me while I was naked. You don't have to pretend you didn't see us, otherwise we'll be angry if you look at us again. I think you saved Sarah's life if you look at it, but we definitely wouldn't be mad." Mark put on his shorts and pulled a chair towards the bathtub. She sat and watched as Sandy continued to dry the parts of Sarah's body that were not submerged in the hot water with a warm, damp cloth. He jumped in and got what Sandy told him he needed. Sarah began to move more and finally looked around with apparent understanding. After some effort, he finally spoke and met Mark's gaze. "What's happened? How did I get here? Where's Sandy?" "I'm the one who puts a warm towel on you and presses your ear," Sandy replied with a smile. "How are you? We are very worried about you now." I have a headache," Sarah answered slowly. "I remember feeling cold, and then I didn't feel anything. I thought I was going to die, but for some reason, I just accepted it. How did I get here? Where?" "We're at Mark's house," Sandy replied. "He came for me in his big truck so we could find you. He saw where you were going. He carried it up a steep embankment and threw 2 or 3 feet of snow to his truck. The road conditions were so bad that we decided to stop here to warm up." "Hot water is great," Sarah confirmed. "I have no clothes on. How long has Mark been sitting here looking at me?" "About 2 hours, I think," Sandy replied with a smile. "He didn't look at you the whole time. His eyes looked at me from time to time. I can't blame him for trying so hard to save your life." "I'm not complaining," Sarah insisted. "I wonder how we ended up in such strange situations. Could you wrap yourself up in something warm and get some sleep? I can barely keep my eyes open." "Mark, is it okay if we stay in your bed?" asked Sandy. "Sarah can sleep, but I have to wake her up every few hours to check how she is doing. Do you have any pajamas we can wear?" "I don't actually have pajamas, but I do have gym shorts and a sweatshirt. My t-shirt is too big, but you've already slept in one." "I'll get her back." Sarah and Sandy spent the next 10 hours in Max's bed. Sandy woke Sarah up twice to check on her, but thought she was recovering as expected. When they finally woke up, it was already 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the storm had subsided. When Mark brought his sisters home, his mother offered them coffee and cookies. "Mark, if I don't apologize for being in a bad mood when we first met, my wife and daughter will kill me," William Phillips told Mark. "I will never forget this, and I will never be able to repay you. Everything you did last night for Sandy and Sarah, I just know I'm very grateful." After they left, Sandy walked Mark to the door. "You're a good person, Mark. When I called you, I knew you would help me. You helped. Thank you for everything you have done for me." "Can I call you sometime, Sandy? I don't know what I did to make you so angry, but I'll try to make it right this time." "I really don't think this is a good idea, Mark. I really appreciate everything you've done for us, but I really don't think I can spend any more time with you. I can't change my feelings." Mark is completely confused, but Sandy's complete refusal to interact with him forces him to accept the situation. He nodded and left Sandy standing on the porch. "This man is hurting," Sandy's mother said. "Are you sure he has another girlfriend? He seems sincere." "He's a real salesman, Mom." "I could sell ice cream to an Eskimo," Sandy joked. "It makes him unreliable." "It seemed like you really trusted him when we were both naked in his bathtub," Sarah noted. "Would you trust him with your life but not your heart?" Winter is finally over. The local Chamber of Commerce has scheduled its annual awards ceremony for April. Miss Haynes chairs the awards committee and exercises the powers of her office at her discretion. "Grandma, it's so petty and cruel to insist that I give Mark the Small Business of the Year award. He won't make me suddenly accept the way he treats me. It would just be an awkward situation for him." "I am," Sandy complained. "I want to gain attention and recognition in the business world, and this is one of the most obvious ways to do it," Haynes said. "You earn more than you earn. Just ask a few questions to understand," he began. "Go out. We have found over the years that most business people give terrible thank you speeches. They try to sell their product to everyone in the room, or they simply say thank you. Sit down and ask a few questions from a list. Mark will have the opportunity to explain to you what his business is and how it works. You may be going through difficult times, but that is no reason not to act professionally." "The hard road?" "Grandma, we're not even friends," Sandy responded. "That's a big gap, and that's not an exaggeration. I think he's a liar and a liar." "Yes, unless the situation gets dire and you need someone with character, skill, and courage to help you," Haynes explained. She can't stop her grandmother from honoring her memory at the annual Chamber of Commerce Awards dinner, but Sandy finds a way to teach Mark a much-needed lesson. Mark knew that winning Small Business of the Year would benefit his business. You can use this to develop and improve your position in society. He has sales experience and knows that good media always helps sell. The problem was that the award letter he received also stated that the award would be presented by Miss Sandra Phillips. She practically told him to leave her alone, and he followed her wishes. That didn't mean he didn't think about her often. It broke her heart to find it so reprehensible, without even knowing why. His parents insisted that he come to dinner and accept the award. He reserved 2 tables for the demonstration. 5 of his colleagues and family members attended the event, as well as his parents, sister, and Brittany. After the ceremony began, Mark and his group took their places. There were many speeches and acceptance speeches. Mark congratulates the winners on their awards and asks some general questions about the business and what makes it successful. This is much more interesting than the usual part where the recipient thanks Mom, the guy upstairs, and the janitor. When Mark saw how well the system worked, he began to relax. All you had to do was answer a few questions, including how and when you started your business, what you did, and why you were so successful. "I thought I had an answer to every reasonable question." He has. Mrs. Haynes took the podium to introduce his grandson, who would give the closing speech. Sandy accepted the challenge and began reading about the qualifications needed to receive the prestigious Small Business of the Year award. Mark felt confident and relaxed, at least until Brittany whispered something to him. "I saw this woman. I don't remember where, but I remember. Something was wrong here." "This year's Small Business of the Year winner is Reynolds Restoration," Sandy announced to sustained applause. "The founder and owner is Mark Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, please stand up." Mark stood up and Sandy continued. "Mr. Mark Reynolds, can you tell everyone what your company does?" Mark smiled and sold the benefits of his small business in the best way possible. Sandy asked a few more softball questions before things got interesting. "Mr. Reynolds, could you take a moment to introduce your family and employees sitting at your table? It's always nice to meet those who contribute to the success of the company." Mark didn't hear the question but thought it was a good idea. "Your children deserve recognition." He asked everyone to stand during his speech. He led Brittany into the stands, introduced her as Brittany Roberts, then turned to her mother, who was next. "Wait a minute, Mr. Reynolds," Sandy interrupted. He made no mention of Missy Roberts' connection to his family or business. "Can you tell me more why there is such an attractive woman sitting at your table, if she is not an employee or a member of your family? She must be special to you." "She's in the restaurant," Brittany whispered out loud, thinking about the woman who had walked away, clearly upset. Brittany tried to understand what was bothering this woman so much. What was the conversation about that day? "This woman is in love with you," Brittany screamed at Mark. "It's as clear as the nose on your face. Sorry about the expression." Sandy easily heard Brittany's comment and felt challenged by the beautiful woman. "We can't all be models with perfect faces and bodies." Some of us have to work to get what we get. By then, Brittany had already put the pieces of the puzzle together. She was the woman Mark had been dreaming about all spring. She left him because she thought Brittany was sleeping with Mark and wanted to marry him. Marcos doesn't know. "Miss Phillips, you've achieved your big goal," Brittany announced from the hallway. Mark is like a walking zombie, trapped in unrequited love. However, Mark's brother thinks I'm absolutely adorable, and that makes me happy. He proposed to me and will be coming home with a ring next week. Do you want to know something? I will return his love in any way I can. He deserves it. I am proud to be Mrs. Brittany Reynolds, wife of Jeff Reynolds. She's on active duty in the United States Navy. Mark thinks you are the most beautiful creature on the planet. What are you doing? You're breaking his heart. I heard that he did everything he could to help you and your sister during the big snowstorm last winter. If your goal is to confuse him or harm him in any way, I will come for you. Mark and Jeff are as close as two brothers. Anyone who messes with Mark follows us, Jeff and me. Sandy was shocked by the blonde's revelation. He went to Hawaii to visit his brother Mark. Mark didn't sleep with her. She told those present that Mark thought Sandy was beautiful. The thought of Mark admitting that he was an evil fraudster terrified him. "Mr. Reynolds, I apologize for my behavior this evening. I was completely out of sorts. Congratulations on your well-deserved award," Sandy said before taking her seat. "Wait," Mark's words made Sandy stop and turn to face him. "You asked me several questions. Wouldn't it be fair if I only asked you one or two?" Sandy nodded and returned to the microphone. "Yes, I apologize again. What is your problem?" "Miss Phillips, do you like me or not?" Marcos asked. Mark's question caused the entire audience to gasp. Mark's mother began to smile, and Sarah and her mother seemed excited. "You don't ask questions like that at an event like this," Sandy began. "Miss Phillips, do you love me?" Mark asked again. "So this is your revenge for pretending to be stupid? Do you want to humiliate me publicly?" "I will be present," Sandy stated. "I deserve it, don't I?" Mark looked at Sandy to see her reaction. She looked at him. "To answer your question, motherfucker, I love you madly. I've never felt this way before. I pushed you away like a stupid schoolgirl. Does this answer make you happy?" "Actually, already. I have one more question." "Then I won't torture you anymore," Mark said nervously. "This has to be good," Sandy almost sobbed. "What else do you want from me? One more question and then I'll go. I'm not here today to expose my vulnerabilities in front of hundreds of colleagues. I'll answer one more question and then we'll be done. We're going to do this together." "Okay," Mark agreed. "Sandy Phillips, I love you more than I could ever imagine. Will you agree to become my wife?" Sandy was surprised to hear Mark's comments and questions. She suddenly felt dizzy. Sarah noticed her difficulties and ran to her to support her. "Sister," Sarah says into the microphone, "Mark and 100 other people are waiting for your answer. Do you need time to think? I'm going to marry you. I want to be your wife. It should be as obvious to you as those big breasts on your future daughter-in-law's chest," Sandy declared as laughter and applause echoed through the room. "A peace."